So I think, again, to ecosystem design, how do you tap into collective genius? Well, simple things. So one of the things I love to do is I design workshops and in moments where everybody has the equal time airtime. So literally, we're just going to do round the horn, 2 minutes, timer, go. There's every time you do that, there is like the introvert who doesn't really say much, drops some genius idea on the table, and everybody's like, wow. And all you need to do is just create that space. And as a leader, I think that's the responsibility. It's not to know the path. It's not to be the genius who can see and know all the things and solve all the problems. I think that is an outdated mode of sort of the leader genius. Not that you can't share your insight and be a valuable contributor. It's more like, how do you optimize the collective genius of the people in the room or the people in the conversation?
Welcome to Startups Decoded, the show that gets real about what it takes to build a successful startup. I'm Andy Walsh, 2 times exited founder, strategist, and your host. Each week I talk with top founders, investors, and operators to unpack the plays that drive real traction, not just headlines. If you're building something bold, this is where you'll get the honest insights to scale with clarity and confidence. Let's keep growing together. Hit subscribe and share with your community. It would mean the world to me. Hello and welcome back to Startups Decoded. My name is Andy Walsh, and today's episode we're exploring, is your digital strategy already outdated? And joining me, I have Jay Erickson, who is founder and chief innovation officer for Modus Digital. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. Happy to be here.
It's good to be able to have these conversations. As technology evolves, there's rapid change happening, more than we've ever seen historically. And people who are thinking about digital strategy really need to be thinking probably 1 to 2 years ahead right now. And even then, it's really uncertain where we go. So for today's episode, we'll explore historically where we've come from and today how people are operating, and then start to have a bit of a peek into the future as well. So to get things started, Jay, I'd love to hear your backstory. So maybe we throw back to there.
Sure. Yeah. So I studied some computer science in high school and already had a science mind, but in college, I ended up studying the comparative study of religion. And it was a very anthropological approach, so not a very theological approach, but it really grounded me in understanding the world through the way that people relate to each other, organize themselves around meaning, which ultimately is very, very relevant for the work that I've done for the last 25 years, really understanding needs and wants of people from a UX perspective and a strategy perspective, vis-a-vis the digital sort of matrix, as it were, and optimizing for that, for certain outcomes. And ultimately, there is obviously a huge technology and engineering component, but that UX component is ultimately sort of an anthropological path. So I think it set me up well to have been in the digital space for the last 25 years, and also working with people. Like, how do people make meaning of their initiatives, their jobs, their strategy, their organizations, for their team, for their product, et cetera. So after college, my first sort of real corporate job was doing what I do now, which was working with clients to build digital stuff. Started 25 years ago, which is, it's wild every time I say that, which I've been saying that. It was wild when I was saying 20. Now it's even a little more wild, but it's been a while. And so much has changed, and it's been so exciting, and it's been a wild ride. But when we started, my partner, Rick Levine, and I, we were brought in by a woman, at Coldwell Banker, a large real estate company, named Helen Galasso, who was our first real sort of champion. And we were these, like, in our early 20s, kids, really, looking back. Like, we didn't know anything, but we did know how to navigate this technology. And especially my partner, Rick, was a computer science major. And we worked together with them to build a new version of coldwellbanker.com, their flagship real estate site, which at the time, looking for a house online, and this is 2000, 2001, was like a whole novel thing. Helen saw something in us And I remember we later, and we worked for her for years. And later I asked her, I was like, why did you hire us? And she said, well, I knew that you guys were driven. I knew you were hungry. I knew you were smart. And I remember you and Rick sitting in my office and debating amongst yourselves about something. And I appreciated that. I wanted that, I wanted that dialogue. And so part of that like open collaboration ethos and transparency is something that's been in our company, which was formerly Bootstrap Software, then Bootsoft, and is now known as Modus, and had a lot of evolutions, and still work with Rick every day. But it was very much it felt like, in the early 20s, a little bit of imposter syndrome of like a fake it to here we are in this multi-billion-dollar organization at the corporate headquarters in New Jersey, and asking them to give us, millions of dollars to do a thing. And it just felt, a little heart racing at the time, but it was a really good fit, and it worked out really well. And, we did some amazing stuff with them. I don't have to bore you with all the projects, but for example, the way that Google Maps works now, where you can drag it around, it wasn't like that originally. It was, you had to refresh the page when you wanted to navigate the map. And then there was this technology that came around called AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That's what it stands for. And Google Maps released it, and it was game changer. People were like, this is the coolest thing. You can drag it and it just refreshes. And it was like, oh my God, this is revolutionary. So we were the first ones to do that and take that technology and do that for real estate. So you could drag a map around and see houses and prices and stuff like that. That was just like really exciting and innovative. And that's sort of how we got our start. And I'm always grateful to Helen for seeing some sort of potential in me and Rick, and believing in us. And there were many long all-nighters getting everything done on time. And it was also tech stuff. We're doing stuff no one had ever done before, at scale, with technology that was very, very new, and figuring out servers and just all this stuff, which now you can spin something up in 5 minutes and at enterprise scale. It was not like that in the beginning.
It's such an important lesson, and you covered it there. Today, people are creating industries at the same time that they're building products. So things that weren't able to be done before because the technology wasn't there can now be done, as you say, very quickly and much easier. But then you're still pushing boundaries. And a couple of things that I'd love to talk about there, and will allow us to set up our conversation today. You touched on your study experience, and then Rick, your partner's experience in computer science, and how those two things came together. Fast forward to today to frame up what that looks like today. And I love the idea of understanding how humans make decisions, and that classic thing of we've read books for generations, right? And we know that in Western world and English speaking, you start top left and go bottom right. And there's a learning that's happened over time with how you like process things. So there's inbuilt human behaviors, but today we're doing and seeing things for the very first time. So we're learning behavior as we go. So from a project perspective, thinking about the way that humans interact, and then the way that digital products operate and can solve those problems, how do you think about that problem today?
I'm a big fan of design thinking, and I think that framework is really helpful, and I think it's timeless. I mean, Eames used it basically to design furniture, in the 60s, and then it's been used by all the major tech companies. And it's, at its core, it's really about finding this sweet spot, this intersection between business need or societal need, depending on what your context is, the needs of the human, of the individual human, and the available technology. So what is the intersection of those things that is optimized? And like, I think there's a whole process for moving through design thinking. This doesn't need to be a discourse on design thinking, but I think that's always pretty helpful. And I think on all of those dimensions, you need to explore and articulate at the beginning of every initiative and get really clear, starting usually in the business or startup context with the business objectives. So it's surprising how many times a client comes and says, we want to do a thing. And I'll say, what are your objectives and key results? I don't know. do the thing, do the thing. But why? But why? How do we measure that? How much do you want to move that needle, and in what time frame? And like getting sharp about the business needs and goals of whatever you're trying to doing, and filling out that leg of the three-legged stool is super important. And painting the vision. I love Amazon's practice of the mock press release. We do a thing, it's successful. How do you tell that story to the market as a thought experiment in a year, 2 years from now, 6 months from now? So I think that's an important component. The available technology, which is both like, where's our data? How can we get to our data? Is it some legacy system which we can't access without IT doing something that's going to take 3 years? Or, what's our data environment? What other sort of SaaS products are in the environment that we have that we can use, that we have access to leverage? And then what other core technologies, whether it's LLM or, uh, NFTs, like, there's a lot of really interesting, cool technologies, which in and of themselves aren't worth anything. It's just what are they doing for whom and when is the important question. So really being clear and conversant of understanding the technologies, including the risks and information security and all of that sort of thing that go along with it. You can't be too headlong into things, especially in environments that are where you have sensitive information. And then that last component, which tends to be underinvested in my opinion, is really understanding the human need. We like to think that humans are rational, but we know they're not. So Diane Kahneman and Amos Tversky, years ago won a Nobel Prize, a behavioral scientist and an economist, for basically proving that humans are irrational, and taking a bunch of grad students in statistics and asking them questions and them consistently getting the answers wrong. Statistical questions, but we're formed in a certain way to create a certain perception or bias that is irrational, and getting them wrong. And so if human beings are irrational, AKA emotional, what is their need and want? Like, what is the job to be done? What are they trying to accomplish? Why are they trying to accomplish it? What is the context in which they're trying to do that? Are they on their phone? Are they on the move? Are they in their car? Are they on their laptop or whatever? All of those are really important questions, and really understanding that at that human level, and starting there. So I think, like, to me, really starting with those core understandings of those three angles is where you need to begin.
It's a good framework, and I hear you on the last one there. As far as right now, being able to get to a solution quickly and have it be robust is critical in today's market. But what we're also seeing now, which is really interesting to see how it evolves, is this active learning that goes on. So if you're a regular customer going back to a platform, it'll start to learn things about you. And we saw news the other day around ChatGPT launching a shopping experience. And for the moment, it's not like a Google where you type something in and get paid ads and SEO, etc. It
Mm-hmm.
continues to learn based upon what you search, what you're buying, etc. So it becomes like a personalized shopping assistant for you. And that's one small example. And I look back to key milestones from, say, the App Store launching that created a whole series of industries, in that you could build something, it's get hosted on this platform, and you service a need for someone. And now with the LLMs that are being constructed and agents, etc., the it's not endless, but we're seeing innovation like never before and problem solving. So I guess out of that, looking today, as far as digital strategy, particularly for big corporations, they would all be out of date and like every day falling farther behind. What are some of the things that you're seeing? I'm fascinated on both sides, like large scale organizations who are thinking about how they evolve into AI integration and being effective and scale, maybe compared to SMBs as well and how they operate. I'm so curious about what are the conversations you're having as far as people's focus.
Yeah, I think there's different challenges at those different scales. So thinking about SMB market, I think what is most challenging for them right now. I mean, the capital markets are challenging, right? And that's just part of the condition right now. But they can do so many things, and they have so many possibilities. They have so many constraints there used to be in terms of how much they could do in what amount of time. There's so much ease in terms of, SaaS products, in terms of how quickly you can build something from an engineering perspective, spin something up, that the question, the challenge for them, I think, becomes, well, what to do first? What should we, how do we think about what we should do first, and staying focused on that, and not having, I don't know if you remember that, ever saw that movie, Up, where there's these dogs and there's just like squirrel, squirrel, and they just get constantly distracted, and so I think the startup, because it's easy to pivot and, oh, we'll just refactor that. And we're like, okay, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And then you have this business that all it's doing is pivoting and not growing. So I think that's that's a challenge to be aware of. And so picking the right thing to kind of follow through on and prove in the market and optimize along the way, and being ready to pivot when you can. That discernment, that judgment, which ultimately is sort of a human decision and comes with some, discernment and wisdom. So hopefully you have a good board and you have good advisors that can really, help you there. I think larger businesses at scale, there's such a huge transformation going on in all of our large institutions right now globally. And I think when I really step all the way back, what you see is a shift from linear, hierarchical, didactic systems in that, the way we've organized everything from the economy to the government to communication systems, that doesn't work anymore. Things are too complex, too fragile. And what is starting to replace that is complex systems. And complex systems are fundamentally different. And one image of it would be just the internet itself, right? So in the Defense Department said to DARPA, okay, what if the Soviet Union takes out, this big piece of our communication system? Right now, it'll all break. The whole country will no longer be able to talk to each other because it's fragile, because it's hierarchical, because it's linear. It's a bunch of branching trees or tree branches. And so DARPA put their thinking caps on and they said, well, what if it was a network? What if it was not what if it was a graph system? What if it was a complex system in which there was no centrality and it was a bunch of distributed nodes that, you could take a piece out, you could take out the Northeast and the rest of the country could still communicate, which is what the technology that we're talking to each other on, and all of the little packets that are flowing between us are flowing across this, 99.9% complex system, network, which is fundamentally different. So I think that kind of shift is happening on all levels right now on the planet. And I think it's happening to corporations, right? So you're moving from a management culture, which is very strict command and control, to something that is a little more organic, where people have a little more autonomy. There's a little more pods. It's a little more flat, all of that stuff, just in how management happens. And I think the same thing for strategy and digital strategy and product development. So, that shift has been going on for a long time. When we started working 25 years ago, the dominant paradigm was waterfall methodology, right? Which is a linear, hierarchical didactic system, A, B, C, D, E. You move through, there's lots of documentation. And then Agile came about, and Agile said, screw all that. We favor working code over documentation. And Agile is fundamentally like a more complex system versus waterfall. So I think at the strategic layer, at the management layer for your strategy as a company or digital strategy, that, the world in which, a management consultant will go off and create this, 100-page deck with a 3-year plan, that doesn't work anymore. The world is too complex and moving too fast. And that deck is very fragile and will be out of date in months. So you have to shift how you're doing things. And so what I'm a fan of, something that I work on training organizations on and weave into my work, and I'm a big fan of, is what I call, or is called, emergent strategy. And so Adrienne Marie Brown is a brilliant, actually, social activist and poet and many things. And she has a book called Emergent Strategy. It's a beautifully written, really smart, and it's applicable no matter what you're doing, in my opinion. And I knew we were having a conversation around this. So I have a couple of quotes from her. I want to honor her thoughts and her writing. So I'm going to read her definition of emergent strategy, which is a strategy for building complex patterns and systems of change through relatively small interactions. So it's the same paradigm as a flock of birds or a school of fish or a hive of bees, where it's like, it looks like chaos, or an ecosystem, right? It's ecosystem thinking. At a distance, it's like, seems maybe a little chaotic, but there's an incredible order to it. It's just complex. And there's a bunch of relatively small rules that govern it, that the way they interact does stuff. And I think the ecosystem is a great image for it, because, there's no board of directors as far as we know. I mean, that's a different podcast for the ecosystem, right? It's just stuff doing stuff and interacting in a certain way with a set of rules and creating amazing things. And it's resilient, right? You can poke a hole in it like a network and it'll heal. It'll still work. So I can go on about it, but I can talk more about how it shows up in the corporate sphere, but that's a long answer to a simple question.
That's great. And we were definitely on the list for talking about emergent strategy today. And it's fascinating. And I've had a few conversations now on previous episodes around product building in context of today and how far ahead you can plan. And it's been a real consensus that if you're thinking about a 2-year plan in product, then you're dreaming, because it'll be a whole bunch of work that you'll have to do 10 times over between now and the end of that timeline. So it's been pragmatic. And I guess within that, in the emergent strategy space, like the analogy, I love flock of birds, because you know that there's an organization, but it can change quickly and easily from direction, and weather impacts it. There's all sorts of great things as a metaphor within that. So if you were to break that down into a simple brief, how would you look at thinking about being nimble short term with your product and digital strategy to be able to not double down too much, but at the same time leverage all the available things that you can to optimize what you're doing?
So I think about it, one way to think about it is ecosystem engineering. How would you actually design the ecosystem of your company or your team to accomplish what you want it to accomplish? There's the notion of ecosystem services. And actually in that vein, we worked with Gore, WL Gore, years ago to develop their digital strategy. And we came up with the mental model of the innovation farm to replace the innovation funnel. The funnel is didactic, hierarchical. Okay, let's replace it with something else. Innovation farm. In our second iteration of that model for innovation, we ended up focusing on the soil layer, and we realized that the innovations team's job was to kind of be the mycelia in the soil, which the mycelia is the core of the organism, of the fruit of which is a mushroom. But we know now, and we're learning, it's a fascinating whole world, right, that's going on underneath our feet. But they move information and they move nutrients between different organisms in the soil and even between species. And so part of the job as a leader, I think, is to be mycelial, is to connect people, ideas, information, resources at the right time to have the best outcome and maintain that sort of health. Another way to think about it is culture. So there's a great book I often try, when I do retreats and stuff, we'll do book club on, called The Culture Code, by Dan Coyle. And it's all about, he basically looked at high performing teams. He looked at a Navy SEAL team, a basketball team, a submarine crew, like all these different teams. And he said, okay, once you control for everything else and distill everything else out, what makes these teams so high performing? And his answer was culture, how they relate to each other, their culture. So I would say invest in your culture. Culture will beat strategy every day of the week right now. It's just culture is the glue, is the magic, is the thing that you can, use to optimize, your outcomes, and it can be a culture of rapid feedback cycles, of, looking at analytics and running, a test and learn culture, a culture of, engineering excellence where you're doing X, Y, and Z, really being intentional about creating culture, the kind of culture you want. And that'll be a differentiator. It'll help you deliver more product faster, be more resilient. And when you bring someone in, initiate them into your culture, as opposed to reading the 100-page training manual that they just, are going to refer to section 3, paragraph 2 to know what to do. That model doesn't really work anymore either. So those are some thoughts on how to make it practical.
So good. And a few things that you said there, for any of you watching The Last of Us, I love the mushroom reference. And if you've seen season 2, I don't want to be a spoiler, but there's a scene where the infected storm Jackson, and it's
I
fascinating
saw that.
yeah, they have these moments where all of a sudden every one of them, without any communication, just change direction and go 90 degrees than they were heading with this collective intelligence that's joining them all. And I think it's literally what you're talking about is there's established processes in there, but it's very adaptable. So there's things that they do by default, but then through change, it allows you to, I guess, drive optimal performance and the right plugins and to test and learn. And right now, a lot of these businesses are brand new. They've had investment, maybe they're growing revenue, but who's to say they're going to last? So there's also a risk with doubling down too much on one of these products or feature sets as part of your business as well until they get established. And I'd assume that there's risk in that you're talking about with your clients as well, as far as choosing the right partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any healthy ecosystem is diverse, right? We know that you go out and you do monoculture planting, go out and plant the same thing and, hundreds of acres. It's not good. It's not good for the soil. It's not good for those plants. Maybe you get one good year out of it. But what you're looking for is diversity. And I think that diversity both on your feature set, on your product suite, if you have a portfolio approach, smart, you want things that are synergistic, that are non-competitive, and expect there'll be some composting, like some things aren't going to work, but it's not a failure. What it is nutrients to go back in. What did you learn? What is a component? Can we take that little piece of that thing that we tried and weave it into this other feature in a way that is helpful? So thinking of composting. I think you're right. I mean, I think a better image than zombie mycelia that has just created the apocalypse maybe is but I mean you're right about that and how mycelia operate in that sort of distributed consciousness, but is a beehive. And so I keep bees, and I'm always learning from them. There's a couple of things about them. The organism is the superorganism. So when I think of the organism, I think of the hive. And occasionally, like, I will smush a bee by mistake, and I do it with my daughters, and they're always like, "Oh no, we smushed a bee." And I say, "Well, yes, it's sad, and we want to honor that bee, but that's like a cell in your body." And so there's like a resilience, and I'm not saying. So just thinking about like the system is the organism, that to be thinking about that and that resiliency. And worker bees, which is out of 60,000 bees, almost all of them are worker bees, these female worker bees. Each of them will do all the jobs in their lifetime. So there's like gather nectar, make honey, feed the young, guard the entrance, take out the dead, seal the cracks. All of these are different jobs in their life cycle. They will all rotate through them. So there's something also resilient about having people who can do different stuff. So I think, like, when you're thinking about, who you're going to hire, I think you want to hire, yes, you need, someone who has a specific skill, but can they also do X, or do they have potential to do Y? How is their cultural fit? How are they going to interact with the rest of the team? I think those questions are as important as, are they a genius in that one thing that we need them to do next week? Because you're not sure what you're going to need them to do in 6 months.
Yeah, the rise of the generalist is something that I see a lot of conversation of, and I love that is a thing. And mine, like, openly admitting mine was not by design, but I've got such a range of skills, and I feel like that breadth is what now has become my strength. And what you're talking about there is not just skills, but also an open mind. And I'd love to explore a little bit about bias. And right now, human evolution and our brains cannot keep up with the changes happening in the world. And if you think about previous technology, from the farming revolution into the industrial revolution, even computers, those days of the supercomputers in NASA where they take up a room that's probably the size of a tennis court, I think that changed over a period of time that allowed us as human beings to adjust to it in an easier way. But now we're seeing such seismic change. If you're organizing and planning and building these experiences, how do you have an open mind to be objective and not bring historical bias back into the process? As far as, like, you always get these strong personalities that say, this is how I've always done it. But how you've always done it is the complete wrong approach to how you think about digital today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unconscious bias is a super hard thing, right? Because how you don't know, you don't know. So how it's by definition unconscious. That doesn't mean that you can't create methods and intentionality. Like if you're working on setting up the culture for your team, um, you write it into your sort of cultural manifesto. We question our biases. That's part of your culture. That's how I would start. And then think about, like, as a leader, just peppering in the questions. So you have a meeting, you decide, you say, okay, guys, before we go and put this into the build queue, just bias check. Is there something we're not seeing here? Just asking that question, alone can help shift things. And then I would say, lastly, when you sort of like touched on this in your last comment there, it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've sit in boardrooms, and sort of the decision that gets made is essentially, the rubric is, what is the whim of the top ranking person in the room today, which is not a great way to make a decision. Like, yeah, they have some genius and they've done some things and probably like why they're in that role, and that's valuable, but it's too arbitrary, it's too capricious, and it's too ripe for unconscious or even conscious bias. So I think, again, to ecosystem design, how do you tap into collective genius? Well, simple things. So one of the things I love to do is I design workshops and moments where everybody has the equal time airtime. So literally, we're just going to do round the horn, 2 minutes, timer, go. There's the and all every time you do that, there is like the introvert who doesn't really say much, drops some genius idea on the table, and everybody's like, wow. And all you need to do is just create that space. And as a leader, I think that's the responsibility. It's not to know the path. It's not to be the genius who can see and know all the things and solve all the problems. I think that is an outdated mode of sort of the leader genius. Not that you can't share your insight and be a valuable contributor. It's more like, how do you optimize the collective genius of the people in the room or the people in the conversation? And just to go back to the bees for a sec, they're not a monarchy. So like, there's the queen bee, obviously everybody knows about the queen bee, but, and she's like more like, run sort of guides day-to-day operations by releasing pheromones that say, this is what we need to do generally. So it's more like an OKR of like, this is the shine, like we need more honey. And then I'm not going to tell you how, where, when, just like, hey guys, I think we need more honey. I see this, general OKR, right? But when she stops doing her job, so any egg she lays can become a worker bee, a drone, which is a male, or a queen. And so the workers decide, she's not cutting it anymore. We don't like the direction she's setting. She's not laying eggs in a good pattern. Let's put some different stuff in these cells and raise new queens. And so those new queens, those come out and they kill the old queen. So it's actually a republic. So I think the image of like, and she's in service, she's not like command and control on the details of the hive. She's just there to be generative, lay eggs, and set like general direction, which is, I think, a better model for a leader than, I'm going to control every detail here and you guys just go and execute every detail of my vision. And I'm also going to shut people down, and we've all seen that, and that's not the culture you want. It's not resilient. And ultimately you're going to have high turnover and you're not going to get the product you want.
So good. I love the bee analogy. It's fascinating how even in a world which is so digital forward, that going back to something organic in nature gives us learnings and lessons that we can take on as far as digital format. And I think it's a great reference. Other thing you touched on there as well, the hippo analogy is something, I don't know if you know that, it's the highest paid person's opinion, which is what you touched on as far as the
Right.
most
I haven't
senior.
heard that. I'm going to steal that. Hippo. I love it.
It's so good, and it happens, and it's bad for culture. And I've talked on a previous episode. There's a great NASA case study about something that happened with one of their missions to the moon, and there was an issue that they thought that they'd identified and were confident to do a launch, and someone raised a concern. Then that person was quite junior within the NASA team. And then the rocket exploded and the astronauts all died on that mission. And it overhauled the whole process for them to then have a more open way of problem solving, looking for ideas, etc., to get that collective expertise that you talk about. And I looked at Atlassian, and something that I see as relevant for innovation for a team that's now so large as a product is that their ability to work async but have projects open for everyone to see. So whatever you're working on, they can tag it, and if you've got expertise, it could be something completely random that you know by chance. It's not even your job, that could be a contributing factor to a project with someone you probably don't even know. So a way to digitally sort of tag and find those things to leverage skill sets across the whole team, because once you get to a big scale, it's really hard to continue to innovate in a way at that sort of size with the right people and accountability and process. And I just love that that is something that exists. And I don't know how much they're tracking from an effectiveness point of view, but it feels like a real opportunity to stay big but stay nimble.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I hear two things in what you just shared. I think the first one is safety. Like people need to feel safe to say, I'm not sure about that, or what about this? And creating that culture and that feeling of safety is so important, and sort of removing the sense of hierarchy and power dynamics. So, that in that culture code, he talks about the SEALs have this ritual of an after action report. So after every mission, they have this after action report, and everybody literally takes off their insignias. There's no rank in the room. It's a closed door. It's like a safe space for them to share what didn't go right, and that's just a critical piece of their culture. So creating those safe spaces. And then the second piece is transparency. There are sort of degrees of it, but I'm a big fan of transparency. And if you're doing something that is indefensible and that's causing you to not be transparent, then maybe you should think about what you're doing. And if you're trying to change a culture, and especially in large organizations, it can get very political. Everyone wants to keep their, cards close to their vest. And, sometimes, we work with these companies, we have, multi-billion-dollar massive companies. We have, these MSAs and strict confidentiality. And they'll share information with us, but they're like, don't share it with those guys. I'm like, you guys are on the same team, right? Yeah, but this and that, and then this and that. And it's like, those things are just so wild to me. And I understand if you're playing chess and you're doing the Westeros thing, like why that makes sense. But I think the leader who comes out, and I see this more and more in these large organizations, the leader who comes out and says, here's all our stuff. Everybody's welcome. Come into the tent. It's warm. They're having more success, and it's easier, and it's more fun, and it ultimately leads to better results.
Agree. And I've seen it myself. The more transparent you are with company goals and success and tracking, there's a school of thought that seeing too much and anything that has red flags or warning signs about someone's job can make them leave. But I've seen the opposite, where the more transparent you are, the more people will unite on a mission and vision and actually double down and know how to prioritize. It's respecting the team and their own experience to contribute towards a bigger goal. So I love that. You've referenced some great movies and books today, and I think it's really important that we learn from, I guess, how people can take their own path. Is there anything that you would recommend? You've called out two books today. Is it podcast material? Is it iterating on ChatGPT? How do you start to think about your own version of a worksheet to do a brief to audit what's happening right now? What sort of things are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, those are touchstone books for me. Emergent Strategy, Adrian Ray Brown, Culture Code. I think those are great starting points for some of this stuff. There's another really important book in my path that's called, I think the title is like Poetry and the Salvation of the Corporate Soul, which is by the great poet David Whyte, who is just an amazing poet and is sort of like in the naturalist poet of Mary Oliver tradition. But he's also an adjunct professor at a business school in Britain. And he works with executive teams to sort of, how do you bring in storytelling and soul and heart, into the workplace. And I think that's important, an important part of culture building. I do think GPT is an amazing resource, and there's so much opportunity to have a conversation and reflect. Like I've been using GPT a lot driving around in my car with the voice mode, and we have wide ranging conversations, and I will explicitly ask for reflection. Well, what do you think about this? And what do you think of that? And it's gotten to know me, and you have to be very aware of bias there, because once it gets to know you, it will really, yeah, I actually thinking about wiping out the memory of my GPT because it feels so skewed sometimes. It's like so eerily familiar. But in terms of, and just being clear about your own intentions, I think slower is faster sometimes. And what am I really want to focus on right now, and why? And then starting there. And yeah, you have a conversation with GPT, read a book about it, have a conversation with some trusted advisors. Don't try and go it alone. I mean, part of it is, there's so many resources, books, people, advisors, someone who you might not think of even as a business advisor, who is just like a person you trust, is a great reflector, and force you to articulate what you're after. I find a lot of lessons and value in nature itself, like just going for a walk in the woods. And there, to me, there's like analogy everywhere. And there's like nature can be like a text itself to kind of read for inspiration, think about things, and even bringing that back to your team, like that inspirational as a leader, there's a ancient tradition of being like, oh, went out in nature and I learned a thing and I came back and here's the thing, you're offering it to the village of what I learned. So being able to say I was out in nature, I was thinking about our Q2 strategy, and I see this rock and there's this stream and I think we need to flow around the rock, which is our competitor and the stream. And like, I'm not saying people, I'm obviously very big on nature metaphors, but this is what we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years, is walking around in those environments, contemplating things and getting insights and going back and telling other people. So there's something that is in I believe, all of our memory around that. And that text is pretty much available all the time.
Yeah, there's so much research about the positive impact of just going for a walk, sunshine, bare feet in the grass is definitely a beautiful way to ground yourself and just change context. So I think that combination is fascinating. And some of the themes that I'm hearing there, having an adaptive team is really critical. That comes down to culture and leadership. So I think as far as being able to not get too stuck and attached to things feels like that's good advice. And then the second part is very much around an adaptive process from a digital strategy perspective. So not playing long bets at this stage, but trusting yourself to test and learn and make that a dynamic process. Would you say they're the two key things that we've covered today?
Yeah, I think so. I think intentionally building culture, I think just to get a little even more practical about it, like just back to a three-legged stool or triple helix, operating in sprints. I think even for large corporations, like we have at Modus, we have an innovation sprint, sort of innovation as a service model that we offer, because sprints are the nomenclature and culture of sprints was born from Agile. So it's inherently Agile, right? And organizing everything in sprints. So you can have a business or strategy sprint, a UX sprint, and an engineering sprint. Those three sort of work streams operating all at the same time that are interlocking and informing each other. And if you set that time frame to be 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is, it's inherently going to be adaptive, because part of that is at the end of every sprint, you say what went well, what didn't go well. You do the retro, which is like that adaptive learning piece on all sprints. Finance sprint, fundraising sprint, 2 week sprints, what went well, what didn't go well, what's our backlog, what do we need to focus on in the next 2 weeks, month, whatever your period is. So I think expanding that model, across a business is one I just want to offer as like a specific practical technique to that can bring together a lot of these themes.
So good. It's a great way to finish up. And I think within that, I see the test and learn as a very much a cultural thing and a process thing. You've got to be like open-minded yourself, but you also have to think about systems. So to close out though, I'd love to give you a chance to talk a little bit about Modus and the type of clients you're working with and what people should reach out to you about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Modus is a digital consulting firm. We do strategy, UX research, UX design, engineering, so product management. We tend to work with larger companies because part of that is our expertise. Like we like to say we're wise to the enterprise. So we can navigate procurement and we can also navigate some of these larger things. And we do human-centered design is our core, but we also do that in the enterprise context, knowing that the CFO is a human, the CMO is a human. What stories do they need to hear, and sort of how do you engage with people in a way that unlocks their genius and their excitement to really capture that energy for best outcome, which is its own sort of art. So we really love doing that. We work a lot in healthcare. We work a lot in finance. I'm a cancer survivor for 10 years and super healthy now, but that experience put a lot of passion in me around improving the digital experience for patients and healthcare providers. So we do a lot of work around that stuff and very passionate about that.
Happy to hear that news. I knew that previously, but I think it gives you a new perspective, and I love the human-centered design. I think it's more important than ever that we're checking in with how we act as humans individually and as a collective, and how that is very complementary to any digital experience too. So Jay, great way to close. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute treat.
No, thanks so much for having me. I love the conversation. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to Startups Decoded. If today's conversation helped you think differently, share it with the founder in your network. And don't forget to subscribe for real-world startup insights every week. We really value your support. If you're interested in partnering with us, email hello@startupsdecoded.com. I'm Andy Walsh. I'll see you next week.